They thought they could take everything from me. My family's farmland, my legacy, my future, all sold off by an HOA that had no right to touch it. But what they didn't know was that I had been on this land long before their HOA even existed. And when I started digging through my records, I found something even better than proof of ownership. What would you do if the very people who stole from you suddenly found themselves at your mercy? If you love insane HOA revenge stories, hit that subscribe button and let's get started. The morning started like any other, with the sun rising over my fields, casting golden light over the wheat swaying in the breeze. I had lived and worked this land my entire life, just like my father and grandfather before me. Our family had owned these acres long before there was even a paved road leading to the town nearby. That's why, when my phone rang that afternoon, I had no reason to expect anything other than the usual. A supplier confirming an order, a neighbor asking for a favor, or one of the ranch hands checking in. But instead, I heard my lawyer, Sam Grayson, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got a problem," he said. "The HOA claims they've sold your land." I almost laughed, thinking it was some ridiculous mistake. "That's impossible," I said, stepping onto my porch and looking out over my fields. "The HOA doesn't own my land. I never signed anything. My deed is clear." There was a long pause on the other end before Sam finally said, "You need to get down to the county office now. You need to see this for yourself." Within the hour, I was standing in a cramped government office, staring at a thick file of documents laid out in front of me. Sam flipped through the pages, his expression grim. "This," he said, tapping one of the stamped forms, "is a sales agreement transferring 1,500 acres of your farmland to the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association. According to this, you sold them the land 6 months ago." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's a lie. I never sold anything," he nodded. "That's what I thought. But take a look at this." He handed me another paper, a copy of a signature, supposedly mine, authorizing the transfer. My stomach turned. The signature looked close, but not quite right. "This is forged," I muttered, my hands tightening into fists. "They faked a sale and think they can get away with it." Sam leaned against the counter, sighing. "Not just that. The HOA already flipped it to a developer. Construction is scheduled to start next month. If we don't act fast, they're going to bulldoze your land." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had seen the neighborhood creeping closer over the years, watched as more houses popped up along the edges of town, but I never thought they would be bold enough to try and steal from me outright. My land was my livelihood, my history, my future. The idea of losing it, of seeing concrete poured over the fields where my father taught me how to plow, where my grandfather once ran cattle, made my blood boil. "Who authorized this?" I demanded. "Who signed off on a fraudulent sale?" Sam pointed at the name on the final approval form, HOA President Daniel Whitmore. "And the notary on the deal?" "His wife." My jaw clenched. Daniel Whitmore had always been a smug, power-hungry snake, the kind of guy who smiled in your face while plotting against you behind your back. I had ignored his petty HOA nonsense over the years, letters complaining about dust from my tractors, fake noise complaints from my cattle, even a demand to maintain aesthetic consistency with their neighborhood. I never responded because it wasn't worth my time. But now he had declared war. Sam leaned in, lowering his voice. "We can take this to court. You have the original deed. That sale is fraudulent, which means we can get the entire deal overturned. But you need to be ready to fight, because they aren't going to back down easily." I nodded, already forming a plan. "I want to see every document related to this sale," I said. "Every paper they filed, every approval they forged. If they think they can steal from me, they're going to learn the hard way just how wrong they are." Back at home, I pulled out my safe and laid out the documents my father had passed down to me, the ones proving my family's ownership of this land for generations. the official deed, the zoning exemptions, the tax records. Everything was in order. I called Sam and told him to start filing the paperwork. "We're stopping this before a single shovel hits my soil," I said. "They don't own an inch of this land." But as I flipped through the old documents, something caught my eye. A section in the property records I had never noticed before. It was a reference to an inheritance transfer filed decades ago, when my father took over the land from my grandfather. I traced my fingers over the details, reading carefully, and then I saw it. A notation at the bottom, barely visible in faded ink, about a second land parcel, one I had never known about, heart pounding. I pulled out the old county maps and cross-checked them against the deeds. It took me nearly an hour, but when I finally pieced it all together, I felt the first stirrings of something bigger than anger. This wasn't just about getting my land back. This was about something else, something that made the HOA's actions even more reckless. Because according to these records, my father hadn't just inherited the farmland. He had inherited an additional 300 acres that extended beyond what I had always considered our property. And that land overlapped with part of the Oakwood Hills neighborhood, the very neighborhood where the HOA board members lived. I sat back, stunned. They had stolen my land, but in doing so, they had overlooked something critical. They were living on land that legally belonged to me. A slow grin spread across my face. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was an opportunity. I closed the folders, my mind racing. The HOA thought they had already won. They thought I would just roll over, accept a payout, or spend years in a drawn-out legal fight. But they had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and dialed Sam. "Change of plans," I said the moment he picked up. "We're not just fighting this sale. We're going to hit them with something they never saw coming." Sam hesitated. "What do you mean?" I stared out over my fields, imagining the look on Daniel Whitmore's face when he realized the truth. "I mean," I said slowly, "we're going to let them think they've won. And then, when they least expect it, we're going to take everything from them." I spent the next 2 days buried in paperwork, old maps, and every legal document my father had ever saved, combing through the fine print like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The more I looked, the more certain I became. My land wasn't just mine. It was bigger than I had ever realized. The records were all there, hidden in plain sight, stretching back over 60 years. My grandfather had bought the original 1,500 acres, but tucked away in an inheritance transfer when my father took over was an additional 300-acre plot, one that hadn't been farmed in decades. And that land stretched directly under parts of Oakwood Hills, the very neighborhood that had been trying to take my land. The HOA board, including that smug bastard Daniel Whitmore, had been running their little kingdom on land that still legally belonged to me. The discovery hit me like a sledgehammer. If I owned that land, it meant that dozens of houses, manicured streets, and even part of their fancy HOA clubhouse were built on my property. And the best part? The HOA had never actually filed the necessary paperwork to transfer ownership. They had simply assumed that, when the development expanded, everything had been squared away legally. But it hadn't. Their lawyers had either been sloppy or cut corners, and now that mistake was about to cost them everything. I drove straight to Sam's office, my truck kicking up dust as I tore down the gravel roads into town. He barely had time to greet me before I slammed the papers down on his desk. "Look at this," I said, my pulse pounding. "Look at this damn gold mine we just found." He scanned the documents, flipping pages with the precision of someone who had spent his life in legal battles. His eyebrows furrowed. "Wait a second," he muttered, reaching for a zoning map from the county records. "If this is correct, then your property line extends beyond the northern boundary of Oakwood Hills. Jesus, Frank, do you realize what this means?" I leaned forward, gripping the desk. "I know exactly what it means. It means those HOA bastards are living on my land." Sam let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "This is a mess. A massive mess." If what you're saying is right, then legally, every homeowner in that section of the neighborhood is on land that was never theirs to begin with. He paused, tapping a pen against his desk. Which means their property deeds are invalid. Their mortgages, based on land that was never properly transferred. If you wanted to, you could file a claim and take it all back. A slow grin spread across my face. That's exactly what I plan to do. Sam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Frank, you have to understand, this isn't just some simple lawsuit. You're talking about pulling the rug out from an entire community. People could lose their homes. I crossed my arms. They had no problem trying to steal my land. They tried to erase my family's legacy, and you think I should feel bad for them? He sighed, knowing there was no talking me out of it. So what's the plan? I thought about it for a moment. We wait, Sam blinked. Wait? I nodded, my mind already working ahead. Right now, they think they've won. They think I'm scrambling, getting my little lawsuit together, trying to stop them from developing my land. But what happens when they find out they're the ones who built their houses on stolen property? A slow smile crept onto Sam's face. They'll panic. Exactly, I said. And we use that panic. We let them go forward, thinking they've won. Let them spend their money, sign their deals, break ground on my land. Hell, let them start construction. And then we hit them with everything at once. The next few weeks were agony. I went through the motions, pretending to be the frustrated farmer fighting a losing battle, while quietly putting everything in place. I filed the necessary paperwork with the county, but didn't make a big deal about it. I let the HOA keep sending their violation notices, let them believe they had me cornered, all the while preparing for the moment I would drop the hammer on them. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived in my mailbox. An official notice from the Oakwood Hills HOA. It was exactly what I had been waiting for. Final notice of land acquisition. Dear Mr. Franklin Johnson, the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association has completed the sale of Parcel 16A to Oakwood Hills Development, LLC. As per county regulations, your claims regarding land ownership have been reviewed and deemed invalid. The development will proceed as planned. Any further disputes may be directed to the HOA Legal Counsel. Effective immediately, construction will begin on the 1st of October. Any trespassing beyond this date will result in legal action. Best regards, Daniel Whitmore, HOA President. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I had to sit down. They had just signed their own death warrant. That very night, I filed an official land ownership claim with the county, citing the inheritance clause that proved my continued ownership of the 300-acre section of Oakwood Hills. The filing triggered an automatic property review, which meant that every single homeowner in that section would soon receive a notice that their deeds were now under dispute. Their mortgages would be flagged, their insurance policies would be questioned, their entire neighborhood would be in limbo. I could only imagine the look on Daniel Whitmore's face when he got the same letter in his mailbox. The man had spent years using his position to bully people, playing king of his little HOA empire, thinking he was untouchable. But he had made one mistake. He came after me on my own land. The next morning, I made my way down to the county courthouse, where an emergency meeting had already been called. Apparently, the panic had started spreading fast. Homeowners were showing up at the HOA office, demanding answers. Real estate agents were calling, confused about why they couldn't close on home sales. And in the middle of it all was Daniel Whitmore, pacing back and forth in the courthouse hallway, his face pale as a ghost. He spotted me before I reached the clerk's desk, his expression twisting in fury. "What the hell did you do?" he snarled, storming toward me. I stopped, crossed my arms, and smirked. "You sold land that didn't belong to you, Daniel, and now you're about to lose everything." His jaw clenched. "This won't hold up in court. The HOA has power." I tilted my head. "Oh, I know. That's why I made sure the banking institutions knew about the dispute before the HOA did. You know what happens when a property's deed is flagged as invalid? Mortgages freeze, sales collapse, insurance policies get suspended. I leaned in. Tell me, Daniel, what happens when a whole neighborhood suddenly becomes unsellable? His confidence shattered in real time. You wouldn't. I already did. I left him standing there, watching as everything he had built started crumbling around him. The real fight was only beginning, but I already knew the outcome. I wasn't just taking back my land, I was taking their homes too. And when the dust settled, there wouldn't be an HOA left to fight me. I spent the next month laying the foundation for what was about to become the most satisfying downfall I had ever orchestrated. It took patience, restraint, and a whole lot of pretending to be defeated. But I knew that every second I let them think they had won was another second I got closer to dismantling them completely. Daniel Whitmore and his HOA cronies strutted around like kings, acting as if my land was already theirs, as if I were just some stubborn old fool who didn't know when to give up. They had no idea that every smug smirk, every condescending letter, and every fake legal threat was just adding fuel to the fire I was about to set under them. The first step was keeping them overconfident. If they had the slightest suspicion that I was preparing to crush them, they'd go on the defensive, and I needed them to feel completely secure in their fraud. So I played the part of the angry but ultimately powerless farmer. I showed up at their HOA meetings, yelling about the injustice of it all, demanding answers that I knew they wouldn't give me. I let them think I was desperate, clinging to some fantasy that my land hadn't already slipped through my fingers. I watched Daniel smirk at me from across the room while his board members whispered amongst themselves, probably talking about how I'd eventually break and take whatever measly settlement they were planning to offer me once they were done burying me in legal fees. But while I was putting on a show for them, I was working in the background. I had already filed my land ownership claim with the county, but that was just the beginning. I needed more than just legal documents. I needed proof that the HOA had knowingly acted in bad faith, that they had orchestrated a fraudulent sale, and that Daniel and his board had knowingly built homes on land that wasn't legally theirs. So I started talking to people, a lot of people. First, I went to the county records office and requested every single document ever filed under Oakwood Hills. Most of it was standard development paperwork, but then I found the meeting notes. HOA board meetings had to be documented by law, and while most of the records were vague and sanitized, one particular entry caught my attention. It was from 4 years ago, when the HOA had first expanded the neighborhood. Buried deep in the transcript was a discussion about a potential zoning irregularity regarding a portion of the land. It wasn't detailed, but the board had brushed it aside, concluding that it was unlikely to cause legal issues. That was my smoking gun. They knew there was a problem with the land ownership and went forward with construction anyway. Next, I went to the residents. Not everyone in Oakwood Hills was part of the HOA cult, and I found more than a few homeowners who were sick of Daniel Whitmore and his cronies. I started with Lisa Patterson, one of the first residents to buy a home in the expanded section. She had been on the receiving end of the HOA's harassment for years. Everything from fines over mailbox colors to demands that she repaint her front door because it was a shade too dark. When I told her what I had found, her face turned white. "You mean my house might not even legally be mine?" she whispered, gripping the edge of her kitchen counter. I nodded. "And it's not just you. It's a lot of homes, and the HOA knows it." That was all she needed to hear. She gave me every letter, every fine, and every shady interaction she'd had with the board. I had no doubt she'd spread the word to the other homeowners, which was exactly what I wanted. The final piece of the puzzle was the developer. The HOA had sold my land to a construction company, but I needed to know how deep the rot went. I had Sam dig into their financials, and what he found was even better than I expected. The development deal had been rushed through approvals, skipping over multiple steps that should have required land surveys, zoning confirmations, and environmental impact assessments. And the kicker? The development company had already taken out loans based on the expected value of the neighborhood expansion. That meant if my land claim held up, and I knew it would, the entire project would be in jeopardy, and the developer would be looking for someone to blame. But while I was gathering my evidence, the HOA wasn't making things easy for me. If they weren't busy threatening me with fines for imaginary infractions, they were trying to turn the community against me. Flyers started showing up in mailboxes about a disgruntled former landowner who was attempting to undermine the community. They claimed I was trying to steal homes from innocent families, that I was a disruptive force trying to devalue property values out of spite. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my fence torn down. It wasn't just vandalism. The entire stretch of fencing along the border between my farmland and Oakwood Hills had been ripped out overnight. And sitting right at the edge of my property, in all its smug, condescending glory, was a freshly planted HOA sign declaring the land as future development of Oakwood Hills. I stood there for a long time, staring at that sign, then pulled out my phone and took a picture, sending it straight to Sam. This is the final straw. They're getting cocky. What's the plan? We let them bury themselves. The next few weeks were crucial. I documented everything: the harassment, the destruction of my property, the public statements they made about the land belonging to them. I even hired a private investigator to record a few of the more interesting conversations happening between Daniel and his board members at the local country club. I wanted them to feel completely safe in their fraud. And then, right when everything was lined up perfectly, I dropped the first bomb. The county sent out official notices to every homeowner in the disputed section, informing them that their property deeds were now in question due to an unresolved land claim. Within hours, the Oakwood Hills HOA office, with phone calls from terrified residents, people who had thought they owned their homes were now staring at legal uncertainty. Property sales were halted, mortgage lenders were flagging the neighborhood, and the entire community was in panic mode. And then came the lawsuits, one by one. The homeowners who had been unknowingly duped by the HOA started lawyering up. The construction company, realizing that their investment was about to go up in smoke, turned against the HOA, accusing them of knowingly misrepresenting the land deal. The local news even picked up the story. A small-time HOA caught in a massive land fraud scandal, putting dozens of families at risk of losing their homes. Daniel Whitmore disappeared from public view. The other board members scrambled to save themselves, throwing Daniel under the bus, claiming they had no idea about the fraudulent land deal. And me? I just waited for the exact right moment to deliver the final crushing blow that would end Oakwood Hills HOA forever. The morning I filed the lawsuit, I knew the days of Oakwood Hills HOA were numbered. The case wasn't just about reclaiming my farmland anymore. It was about everything they thought was theirs. My attorney, Sam, had done his due diligence, preparing a legal tsunami that would sweep through their entire operation and leave them drowning in lawsuits, unpaid debts, and furious homeowners. With my original land claim now verified by the county, our case wasn't just strong, it was undeniable. The moment that lawsuit was stamped and entered into the system, every homeowner in the disputed area became tangled in the mess that Daniel Whitmore and his board had created. And, the best part, they had no idea it was coming. I made sure they found out in the most painful and public way possible. By noon, every single resident in Oakwood Hills had certified legal notices delivered to their doors, informing them that their property deeds were now under dispute. Their homes, the ones they thought they owned, were built on land that had never been legally transferred. Their mortgages, their insurance policies, their property values, all of it was now in question. The reaction was instant chaos. Residents stormed the HOA office, demanding answers. But there were none. Panic spread like wildfire. Homeowners frantically calling lawyers, banks, and real estate agents. People who had just signed mortgages found out they had bought houses sitting on stolen land. Sellers who were in the middle of closing deals had their transactions frozen. No one could buy, sell, or refinance a single house in the disputed area because, legally, it all belonged to me, and then the media caught wind of it. It started with the local paper. But once word spread that an entire HOA neighborhood was built on land they didn't own, it didn't take long for bigger news outlets to pick up the story. The headline was like something out of a nightmare for the HOA. Suburban Scandal. Whole neighborhood built on stolen land. Homeowners face uncertain future. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to me. Reporters called. Real estate lawyers reached out. Even politicians started weighing in. Because if Oakwood Hills fell, what other developments had made similar mistakes? I stayed quiet at first, letting the HOA scramble to explain itself. And scramble they did. At the next emergency HOA meeting, the board tried to control the damage. Daniel Whitmore, who had gone into hiding for the last week, finally showed his face, standing at the podium, drenched in sweat under the fluorescent lights. The residents weren't just mad. They were out for blood. "You told us everything was legal," one man shouted. "You said our deeds were clear," a woman yelled, waving her mortgage papers in the air. "What the hell are we supposed to do now?" Daniel raised his hands, trying to calm them down. "We are working closely with our legal counsel to resolve these misunderstandings," he stammered. "Rest assured, we are confident that misunderstandings," I said, standing up from the back of the room. The entire room fell silent as I made my way to the front. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, including Daniel's, who went pale the second he realized I was there. I held up a thick folder of legal documents. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is not a misunderstanding. It's fraud. It's illegal property transfers, it's zoning manipulation, and it's deception on a scale that's going to bankrupt this entire neighborhood." I let the words sink in, watching the panic spread across the crowd. "Your HOA stole my land, built houses on it, and pretended like it never happened. And now, I'm taking it back!" The room exploded. Residents were on their feet, screaming at the board. Some people were crying, realizing they had put their life savings into a home that wasn't even legally theirs. Others turned on Daniel directly. "You told us we were fine," one man shouted, stepping toward the podium. "You lied to us." "I didn't," Daniel stammered. But he had nothing. No explanations, no way out. And then came the lawsuits. Within days, I wasn't the only one suing the HOA. Homeowners who had once thought I was the enemy were now filing their own lawsuits, demanding compensation for fraud, misrepresentation, and financial damages. Banks started pulling back from the neighborhood, refusing to issue new loans on disputed properties. Home insurance companies revoked policies due to the legal limbo. And worst of all for Daniel, the developer who had bought my land turned against him. See, the construction company that had bought the fraudulent land from the HOA had no idea it was a scam. They had been promised that everything was legitimate, and now their entire project was dead in the water. Their investors were furious, their funding was frozen, and they needed someone to blame. That someone was Daniel. The developer's lawyers filed a $2 million lawsuit against the HOA for fraud and breach of contract, claiming they had been duped into purchasing land that was never legally available. That was the death blow, with multiple lawsuits now pending. The HOA's finances collapsed, their legal defense fund gone, their reserve funds drained from trying to fight me. Within weeks, they were completely bankrupt. The once powerful HOA, the same people who had harassed me for years, who had tried to erase my family's legacy, were done. And Daniel? He resigned in disgrace, but not before being personally sued by multiple homeowners who had lost everything due to his lies. But I wasn't done yet. See, owning the land meant I could do whatever I wanted with it. And after watching them steal from me, threaten me and try to bury me in legal nonsense, I decided that I was going to take everything from them, so I put the entire disputed section of Oakwood Hills up for sale. Not the homes themselves, just the land beneath them. I made one simple announcement. The land beneath Oakwood Hills is now for sale to the highest bidder. If the homeowners wanted to keep their houses, they would have to buy the land from me at market price. Some could afford it. Most couldn't. Overnight, property values tanked. Nobody wanted to buy a house on uncertain land. Mortgage lenders refused to touch them. The people who had once treated me like some dumb farmer were now begging me for mercy. I gave them none. One by one, the houses in Oakwood Hills went into foreclosure as homeowners defaulted on their mortgages. Investors swooped in and bought the land dirt cheap. And when the dust settled, Oakwood Hills no longer existed. The neighborhood was gone, the HOA was gone, and I stood on my reclaimed farmland, watching as the last of their expensive homes were bulldozed to make way for what had always been meant to be there. My family's land. I had won, and I had taken everything from them. The courtroom was silent as the judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the stack of documents before her. I sat next to Sam, arms crossed, watching as the HOA's attorney fidgeted in his chair. Daniel Whitmore sat at the defendant's table, sweating through his suit, his hands clasped so tightly they had turned white. Around us, the room was packed with residents of Oakwood Hills, homeowners who had shown up to hear their fate, to find out whether they still legally owned their homes or if they had been living on stolen land all along. The tension was thick, the weight of every decision the HOA had made crashing down all at once. The judge cleared her throat, and when she spoke, the words sealed the fate of Oakwood Hills forever. This court finds that the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association engaged in fraudulent property transactions, knowingly misrepresented land ownership, and participated in deceptive practices that led to the unlawful sale and development of property that legally belongs to the plaintiff, Franklin Johnson. Therefore, the sale of the disputed 1,500 acres of farmland is hereby nullified. Furthermore, the court acknowledges that, per the legally binding inheritance records, an additional 300 acres of land within Oakwood Hills remains the sole property of the plaintiff. Any existing structures built on this land are subject to his discretion as the rightful owner. The gasps that filled the courtroom were everything I had been waiting for. The HOA's attorney jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this ruling will create devastating consequences for the community." The judge didn't even look up. The HOA had ample opportunity to address these legal concerns before developing land they had no right to claim. They ignored it. They buried evidence. They threatened and harassed Mr. Johnson instead of addressing the issue legally. The consequences they face now are entirely of their own making. Daniel's entire body slumped forward. He knew it was over. They all did. The homeowners sat in stunned silence, whispering among themselves as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Some of them owned houses sitting on land that wasn't legally theirs. Some of them had mortgages on properties that were about to be worthless. The HOA board had lied to them, tricked them, stolen from them, and now everything was falling apart. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me, but I didn't stop to talk to them. I had work to do because, while the legal victory was sweet, the real revenge was only just beginning. That very night, I sent out the first round of eviction notices. Every single homeowner whose property was built on the 300 acres I still owned received a letter informing them that they were now occupying private land without permission. They had two options: buy the land from me at market price or vacate the premises immediately. It wasn't long before the HOA board members started calling me, begging for meetings. Daniel Whitmore was first, slinking into my office like a dog with its tail between its legs. His face was pale, his confidence completely shattered. "Frank," he started, hands clasped in some pathetic attempt at diplomacy, "there's got to be a way to fix this." "Oh, there is," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You could have not stolen my land in the first place." He swallowed hard. "The homeowners, they're innocent in all of this. They didn't know." I narrowed my eyes. They sure didn't have a problem when you were stealing from me. They didn't have a problem when you were fining me for dust, harassing me with fake violations, trying to erase my family's legacy. But now that it's their homes at risk, now it's suddenly unfair? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Listen, I could step down from the HOA board, I could... I laughed. Daniel, the HOA doesn't exist anymore. It's bankrupt. You have nothing left to offer me. His eyes darted around. Desperate. If you force all these people out, it's going to look bad for you. The press is already all over this. I leaned forward. Let me tell you something, Daniel. I don't care how it looks. I care about taking back what's mine. The next day, I started selling the land beneath their houses to the highest bidder. Real estate investors, developers, even the very construction company that had originally been swindled by the HOA, they all lined up to make offers. Homeowners scrambled, trying to raise money to buy their own land. But most of them couldn't afford it. One by one, the houses started going into foreclosure. The former HOA board members were the first to fall. Daniel's home, gone, sold right out from under him. He tried to fight it, but he had no legal ground to stand on. I watched him pack his things and drive away from Oakwood Hills, his entire life in shambles. The other board members, same fate. Karam Monroe, the one who used to send out fines for people leaving their garbage cans out for too long. She cried when she realized she was about to be homeless. James Porter, the HOA's treasurer, he vanished overnight, probably running from the lawsuits stacking up against him. And the residents who had been so smug when they thought they were safe, the ones who had whispered behind my back, watching as I was harassed, fined, and nearly run off my own land, they were suddenly begging me for deals. Mr. Johnson, please, I'll do anything. I just need more time to buy the land. My family has lived here for years. There's got to be a way we can stay. I looked them in the eyes, the same way they had looked at me when they stood by and let their HOA destroy everything I had built. And I said the same thing they used to say to me, rules are rules. By the end of the year, Oakwood Hills was unrecognizable. The once pristine neighborhood, bulldozed, developers put in commercial properties and storage units, things that were far more profitable than cookie-cutter homes. The people who used to brag about their exclusive community were now renting apartments in town, watching helplessly as their old neighborhood was turned into something they could never afford to move back into. And me? I stood on my land, looking over the acres that my family had worked for generations. My farm was still standing, my crops were still growing, and Oakwood Hills, it was nothing but a bad memory. Daniel Whitmore had spent years trying to erase me, to bury me in bureaucracy, to destroy my legacy, and in the end, I erased him. The HOA had tried to steal my land. Instead, I took everything from them. The last HOA board member left Oakwood Hills in a rusted sedan, with everything they owned crammed into the back seat. I watched from the edge of my property as the car sputtered down the newly repaved road, past what used to be a pristine, tightly controlled suburban utopia. Now, it was a husk of its former self. The once identical beige houses now sat abandoned, their perfectly trimmed hedges overgrown. Their exclusive community nothing more than another failed development project in the middle of nowhere. The grand Oakwood Hills sign that once welcomed residents had been removed weeks ago, leaving only the metal posts standing like broken ribs in the ground. The HOA was gone, bankrupt and buried. And I had personally made sure of it. After the lawsuits, the fines, and the sheer collapse of the HOA's finances, there was nothing left of their little kingdom. The board members had become pariahs, their names plastered across news articles and legal documents detailing the fraudulent land grab, the deception, and the financial ruin they had orchestrated. The community, once eager to follow their lead, had turned on them the moment their own wallets were affected. One by one, they were dragged into lawsuits, sued by the very people they had deceived, forced to sell their homes, their cars, their precious little HOA-approved lives just to stay afloat. It wasn't enough that they lost their positions. I made sure they lost everything. Daniel Whitmore, the king of Oakwood Hills, the man who had led the charge against me, had disappeared entirely. Some said he left town after his personal assets were liquidated to cover some of the lawsuits. Others said he was still fighting legal battles, trying to claw his way out of the millions in damages being thrown at him from homeowners, banks, and developers alike. I didn't care. He was out of my sight, out of my way, and out of power. That was all that mattered. Some homeowners had tried to negotiate with me, pleading for some way to keep their properties. They begged, offered payments, even tried to convince me that they had no part in what the HOA had done. I listened to each of them, arms crossed, as they stammered through excuses and justifications. We never wanted this. We didn't know they were stealing your land. I always thought the HOA was being unfair to you, but I couldn't say anything, you understand, right? I have kids. They grew up in this house. Please don't make us leave. I stared at them, the same way they had stared at me years ago when the HOA had harassed me, fined me, and tried to take what was mine. And I told them exactly what they told me back then. Rules are rules. I sold the land out from under them without hesitation, parceled it off to developers, turned their backyards into commercial lots, storage units, and farmland again. The few that could afford to buy back their land paid triple what it was worth, their desperate attempts to cling to their suburban fantasy filling my pockets with the same kind of greedy exploitation they once supported. And the rest? They left. They had no choice. I watched them pack their expensive SUVs, watched their moving trucks roll out one by one, watched their perfect little community crumble into nothing. There was no negotiation, no pity, no second chances. I had given them the same kindness they had given me. The moment the last of them was gone, I stepped onto my land, fully mine once again, and let out a breath I had been holding for years. The fields stretched out before me, untouched by construction, undisturbed by entitled homeowners trying to erase what had stood for generations before them. The soil was still rich, the trees still standing. Despite everything, the land had survived, and so had I. For the first time in a long time, I could truly breathe. I walked through my reclaimed farmland, the dirt familiar beneath my boots, the air heavy with the scent of wheat and soil. It felt right. This land had always belonged to me, to my family, to generations who had worked it long before any HOA existed. It had never belonged to them, and now it never would again. The developers who had partnered with me were already making plans, turning large portions of the land to agricultural use, as it was always meant to be. What used to be perfectly lined rows of McMansions would soon be grazing land, fields of crops, and open space once more. The town had even approved a farmer's market on the southern end of the property, allowing locals to buy and sell produce, a permanent reminder that Oakwood Hills had failed, and that I had won. The press had tried to frame me as a villain, some kind of heartless landowner who had destroyed an entire neighborhood out of spite. But the people who mattered, the ones who had seen what the HOA had done to me, they knew the truth. The HOA had dug their own grave. I had simply buried them in it. I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land that was mine once more. For the first time in years, there were no HOA letters in my mailbox, no fines, no threats, no entitled board members demanding I bend to their will. There was only peace, and as I took a sip of my drink, feeling the weight of total victory settle over me, I thought about everything I had learned. Patience, power, revenge. They had tried to take everything from me, believing they were untouchable, believing that a piece of paper and a board of self-important suburban dictators could erase generations of history. But they had underestimated one thing. This land wasn't just dirt and property lines. It was my legacy, and no one, not an HOA, not a corrupt board, not an entire neighborhood, was ever going to take it from me again.